Okay, in this short video, I want to talk to you about vulnerable people and sexual exploitation because it's part of the top-up training that you have to do now as a door supervisor. So let's start by defining, what a vulnerable person is. And a vulnerable person is anyone basically who's at risk. And generally, we're applying this to young people because you're probably aware that there was a case in the north of England where a young woman was in a nightclub. She was underage. She was leaving. She left with a man that she consented to have sex with. He had sex with her, 3 other men turned up and allegedly said, "Can we have a go?" And then they raped her. And as a result of this, you're now doing training on vulnerable people and sexual exploitation. Sexual exploitation basically is a sexual predator, and a sexual predator is someone who is out to have sex with someone who in the scope of this training is vulnerable. So, let's look at some examples of this. And obviously the case I just mentioned is an example that's actually happened. If you've got a young girl leaving the venue who's absolutely blind drunk, being escorted by a man who is seemingly sober, and she's not compos mentis, that could be an issue that you may want to, raise your warning signs, and you might want to stop them and challenge them on that one and report that to your head doorman or to the venue management, because you must have someone in your organisation now who's responsible for what they call safeguarding. And safeguarding is what you need to do when you are looking out and looking after vulnerable people. So let's look at another example. Let's say you've got a young woman, for example, who sat in the corner of your venue, very, very quiet, on her own, maybe with a group of friends, but very withdrawn, doesn't look very happy, doesn't look as though she's enjoying herself, and she's receiving unwanted attention from a male. And just to distinguish this, let's say it's a much older male who's giving his attention to this girl, and that doesn't look right, and she feels uncomfortable. That may be an example of a vulnerable person who could be sexually exploited. You're probably aware that some of these sexual predators use drugs to actually intoxicate their victims. They use something called rohypnol. They may also use LSD or other forms of drugs. And if you see someone putting drugs into someone's drink, then you would act under that normally because you're trained to do that sort of stuff. And once again, you may want to detain them if you have the powers to do so, and seek advice from your venue management or head doorman, or call the police. Now, if you're in any way unsure about this, then obviously, contact someone. And you have these street pastors working with you now. You have John's Ambulance out there, St. John's Ambulance out there. Speak to these things. Your job as a door supervisor now has changed dramatically since the days when I used to work on the door. You are everything to these people now. You're a police officer, you're a counsellor, you're a best friend, you're a parent to many of these people, and your job is to look after them. You have a duty of care to them. So here's another example. Let's say you get a young person, a young girl, or even a young boy, coming out of a toilet looking extremely, extremely distressed, and being followed by another person who is imposing themselves upon them. That could be an example of a vulnerable person being sexually exploited. It may be coming, a time when someone leaves the venue, they're leaving on their own. So they've come with a group of friends and they're leaving on their own. They're very quiet. They don't, they look totally nervous, and there's someone following them, and they're following them, and it's obvious because they're picking up their pace to get away from this person following them. That could be an example of a vulnerable person who could be sexually exploited. Now, I have to be honest with you, this is not going to be easy for you, because the way nightclubs are these days, and many venues are these days, there are lots of people coming in underage who dress up to make themselves look older, and people are out for a good time, and these things are going to be hard to distinguish from genuine people who are trying to get together in a nightclub, for example. But it's your job as a door supervisor now to spot these things, and where you're unsure, report them to your venue manager or your head doorman. If they're not about and you have a serious concern, then report it to the police, or if you wish to remain anonymous, you can report it to Crime Stoppers. But a vulnerable person is anyone who could be at risk. I mean, normally in these cases, you're looking at people who is a young person, and a child, by the way, is anyone up to the age of 18, not 16 like some people think. A child is anyone up to the age of 18, and the Children's Act and the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child are a protective piece of legislation that protects children. And if they're in your venue and they are underage, you have a child in your venue, it is your responsibility to act in the best interest of that child. That is the law. So if you see a child there who's vulnerable, make contact with that child, talk to them, Let them know that they can approach you, be friendly with them, talk to their mates. If necessary, ask them for some details who they can contact, phone them a taxi, get in touch with their parents, because this is now your job. And it's not a bad thing actually, because everyone has children, they all go out, and parents worry about them. So you're doing a great job by doing this. And I know it's another thing for you to learn, but just think about the seriousness of this at the moment. We've had the Jimmy Savile inquiry going on, Operation U Tree. Loads. I mean, he's the most prolific child abuser we've ever had. Sexual predator we've ever had in this country. We've had young girls who are walking the streets late at night who've been groomed by gangs for prostitution and for sex. This is going on. We had Fred and Rosemary West. I don't know if you remember them. Fred and Rosemary West. They were picking up young girls and abusing them and killing them at their house. And at one stage they did a trawl in Gloucester, and they found that 50 children were missing, whereabouts unknown. And they're out there. And even today, lessons have not been learned from the Fred and Rosemary West case. And there are lots of vulnerable young people out there walking about, and they'll be coming into your club. So, and remember, there's a lot of care homes out there who believe they can't stop a child from leaving a care home. I mean, that's not true, but they believe this because some inspectorates or people in authority tell them they can't stop them. So they leave the care home and come out when probably they shouldn't be. And some of these children may have been abused. They may have been in abusive relationships, had abusive parents. They could have been sexually prostituted and all sorts of stuff. And they may end up in your nightclub. And they are extremely, extremely vulnerable. So that's what you need to be doing. You need to be looking for vulnerability. You need to be looking for someone that's taking advantage of that vulnerability. And if you're in any way unsure, report it to your head doorman or to the venue management. But someone in your venue now must be responsible for what they call safeguarding, and they're the people you report it to. If you're unsure or they're not there, then you can phone the police, you can phone St John's Ambulance, you can get them a taxi, you can remain anonymous and phone Crime Stoppers, but you must do something to protect vulnerable people from sexual exploitation in your venue. So I hope that makes sense. And if you have any questions, I'm sure your trainers can answer that for you in more detail.